So before I get into this discussion, I'd like to address the fact that they are supposedly rebooting King Kong versus Godzilla, and I would love to see this, but I am really iffy about the fact that they are supposedly going to stretch it into a trilogy. I mean, honestly, if they want to go ahead and make this into some kind of big series, go ahead. But before they get ahead of themselves, I just hope that they learn from Hollywood's past mistakes with like Pan and Fantastic Four movies, which were supposed to be the start of these big franchises, but where nothing happened and they ended up failing at the box office. I just hope that the first reboot that they do will be its own standalone movie and that stuff will happen in it. So tonight I'm going to be reviewing both versions of King Kong, the original black and white film and the Peter Jackson movie. And I say both versions because there are only two versions. There was never any other remake between these two movies. So in King Kong, there's this filmmaker named Carl Denham who aims to shoot a movie in this mysterious location known as Skull Island, but as soon as he and his crew arrive down there, he discovers an opportunity to make even bigger money with an even bigger attraction known as Kong. So to start off with, let's talk about this Carl Denham, who I believe to be the villain in both of these movies. In both versions, he's a very hard-headed and reckless individual going on this very insane journey to ultimately destroy one of nature's greatest creations. One of the main differences in these two films is that he was much more charismatic in the original, and it was a little easier to buy the fact that he could sucker all these people into going on that journey with him. In the remake, this character is played by Jack Black, who some believe was miscast in this role, but honestly, I thought he was perfectly fine in the movie. I remember there was even one guy who said this was the only movie where he saw that Jack Black could actually give a good performance. And in this version, Carl Denham is much less charming, and he's just more of this disingenuous and backhanded individual. He's also much less intelligent, and really, he's just more of an asshole out for his own gain. Next, you've got Jack Driscoll, who in each movie is played completely differently, but roughly he is the main hero of each story and also the love interest for the main character, Anne Darrow. In the original film, at the beginning, he gives off more of an impression of being just this very mean and misogynistic character. But as the film goes on, it turns out that he's acting this way just to hide his feelings for Anne. And, it is a little corny. It is a movie romance, but it does come off very natural, and there is at least some development behind it. And he's also a pretty funny character in the original. Also, something I almost forgot to mention about the original is that Jack Driscoll in that movie was working as a crew member on the boat, whereas in the remake he works as a playwright. And in the remake, he is played by Adrian Brody, who is another actor who I don't mind. But in this movie, there's really nothing particularly memorable about the character. And once he starts this romance with Anne Darrow, it feels a lot more forced and awkward. Like, the dialogue between them is essentially, hey, I like your legs. Okay, let's kiss. Now, before I get into the star characters of these two movies, I'd like to touch on the inhabitants of Skull Island, starting off with the creatures aside from Kong. In both movies, you've got dinosaurs on the island, and in the original, all of the creatures were done with stop motion. You start off with the scene featuring a stegosaurus, which is actually more funny than it is scary. But then you've got a considerably more menacing scene with this long necked dinosaur that rises up out of the water like the Loch Ness Monster. And I have no fucking clue what this thing was supposed to be, but I love that little creature that came crawling up the vine coming after Jack Driscoll. And of course, the T Rex fight in the original film was awesome. In the remake, you've got some CGI being utilized, and there are a couple of moments where the green screen is a little meh, particularly during the Brontosaurus stampede. But there are still some really awesome looking creatures in the remake. I love the way that the T Rexes looked. They made them look a little more deformed this time around, and yeah, instead of just having King Kong fight one T Rex in this version, he had to go up against three of them, which just added to the awesomeness. Um, Also, you had these pretty awesome looking vampire bats with this very ugly looking fleshy skin. They looked more vampire like than bat like. And also, I love the freaking spider pit sequence in the remake. It is easily the most terrifying scene in the movie. Um, I don't know how many of you know this, but they were originally supposed to have a scene like that in the original film. I think that they ended up cutting it out for time or something like that, and the footage ended up being lost. But Peter Jackson and his team made a recreation of what that scene may have ended up looking like in the original, in black and white with stop motion effects and everything. It's on the 2 disc DVD that I have, and you can also look it up on YouTube if you haven't seen it yet. It's called Lost Spider Pit Sequence, and if you've got the time to check it out, it is well worth it. Up next, there are these tribes people who live on Skull Island, and I'm just gonna come out and say it. I liked the way that they were done in the original more. They had just the right amount of menace. I loved the music that was playing during their scene. Their costumes looked awesome, and mostly I just like the fact that they felt more humanized in the original. Like when you see the scene where King Kong is getting ready to be captured and taken to America, as he's throwing down in the native village, you are reminded that these natives are in fact people. In the remake, the most suitable word to describe the natives is scary, and they are very effectively so. I mean, they are considerably more terrifying than even the cannibals from the Green Inferno, but really, I thought it was just kind of a stupid decision to strip them of their humanity. And I'm not usually one to pull this card, but their depiction in the Peter Jackson film was pretty racist. And now on to the star characters. First of all, there's Ann Darrow, in the original played by Fay Ray, and um, I guess she wasn't too badly written for the time. She is a very likable character, of course. She's very sweet, and you don't want to see anything bad happen to her. But at the same time, she just feels very desperate and kind of weak as a character. She's a great screamer, though. In the remake, Ann Darrow is played by Naomi Watts, and for one thing, you get more build up with this character. You know more about her background and what she did before this story began. And also, in the scene where she sits down to talk with Carl Denham about what he wants her to do and everything, she comes off as much more intelligent and strong willed, and she's even funnier in the remake. Like, even though I didn't particularly care for the way Jack Driscoll was done in this version, the scene where she is first introduced to him is hilarious and not even on accident. Also, I love how she uses her head to kind of save herself from getting ripped to pieces by Kong. And that scene where she recreates her vaudeville act to throw him off is another one of the funniest in the movie. And now to the main attraction himself, Kong. In the original film, King Kong himself didn't look as much like a real gorilla. they roughly made him look and act like a cross between an ape and a man, but still he looks and acts pretty fucking cool in the original film. It's kind of hard to forget him. And he acts a little more savage and primitive in the original film. There's even one scene where he comes off as straight up pervy, where he's like touching Anne and then sniffing his fingers. But they do also add some nice touches to his character. Like, there's this one moment in the film which I wouldn't have even known about if I hadn't watched this in depth documentary on the making of the movie. And it's one of those blink and you'll miss it scenes where he's in the cave with Anne and he turns around to pick up this flower and smell it, and he's intending to give this to her, but then that long necked dinosaur comes in and he hears Anne screaming in reaction to it, and he's like, well, shit, I gotta deal with this now. And there is still some tragedy to his character with the scene where he's captured, as well as, of course, the end to the film, because, I mean, in the end, he's just an animal with no ill intent. In the remake, of course, he looks and acts more like a real gorilla. Even when it comes to the point where he and Andero become best friends, it's really not that hard for me to buy, because in real life, even though gorillas are these very powerful animals which can easily tear a man to shreds, they're actually pretty peaceful creatures. They're not as violent and depraved as chimpanzees. Naturally, this element of friendship adds much more sympathy to the character in the remake, and they even add on to that with the scene where you see Kong's home, and they show evidence that he used to have a family, but now he's the last in this dying race. And I also love the look in the character in the remake where they add these scars to his face, his jaw's a little bit crooked. You can tell that he has been in quite a few physical fights to maintain his survival. Uh, as far as nitpicks go, my only complaint with Kong in the remake is this scene that takes place on a frozen pond. And I'm not even bitching about the lack of physics. It's just that the first time I watched this movie, I thought that scene was dumb as hell, and even as I was rewatching it today, I thought it was dumb as hell. Now, this is yet another case where whether somebody said that they preferred the original or the remake, the one single remake that they ever made of King Kong, I wouldn't say that they were wrong. Each film has a lot of great qualities to it. And the remake is definitely not perfect. One complaint that I didn't bring up earlier, simply because there was nothing to compare it to in the original, is that Peter Jackson's remake dedicates an entire subplot to this cabin boy. It tries to add some emotional depth to the movie, but really there's not that much to it. And it does absolutely nothing for the story. It's completely useless. However, I like how Andero is a much stronger character in the remake. I even kind of like how Jack Black plays Carl Denham as much more of a disingenuous asshole. And, of course, the creatures are amazing. It has great action in it. It's a monster movie that does a better job at scaring the audience in some parts, and Kong himself is magnificent. So, personally, I prefer the remake in this case. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for this comparison. I hope you all have a good one.